Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. I hope everyone's doing well, inshallah. So last week we talked about the rebuilding of the Kaaba, right? And where I think the Prophet alayhi salam was 35 years of age. We got to that point in the discussion of the Seerah. We talked about the placing of the black stone back in its initial spot and some of the subsequent times that the Kaaba was rebuilt following that incident in the Prophet's life, alayhi salam, and why the Kaaba is structured the way that it is now. So if you remember, we said, for example, Harun Rashid, he asked Imam Malik about the rebuilding of the Kaaba, and Imam Malik said to not build it again on its original confines, right? That Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, the Prophet alayhi salam, had told her at the conquest of Mecca that if not for her people having just come out of Jahiliyyah, he would have rebuilt the Kaaba in its original structure. Do people remember what I'm talking about? Yeah? Anybody have any ideas? Great. Yeah. And so Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she had said this to her nephew, Abdullah ibn Zubair, who had then rebuilt it in its original kind of foundations based off of this hadith. Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi, he then comes and he kills Abdullah radiallahu anh. He engages the Khalifa at that time, and they restore it back to kind of the smaller version of it that doesn't then incorporate the Hatim into the Tawaf circle. This is where then Harun Rashid, sometime later, he asked Imam Malik that should we rebuild it? And Imam Malik says, you don't want to turn the Kaaba into a toy, so that kings will come and just kind of do with it what they please. So it still sits kind of on that original foundation from this time when the Prophet was 35 years of age. So if you remember, the decision that they had made, the Meccans, was that they were going to only use pure wealth to build it, and they ran out of that wealth, so they couldn't construct it to its full setting. Does that make sense? People remember anything of what I'm talking about? Yeah? Great. So what we want to talk about is just that 5-year period now that remains between revelation at the age of 40 and this major pre-prophetic event that is the rebuilding of the Kaaba, and to think about it in a few different frames. One of the things that we want to discuss tonight in detail is the practice that the Prophet engaged in that was called tahannuth, that was about seeking solitude, right? In Arabic, the word hinth means to essentially to sin or to do something wrong. And when you put it into this tafa'ul form, tahannuth, it's about kind of staying away from this thing of sin, So they're going to a place where you're just kind of engaged in practices of real goodness. And even within our tradition, inaction is still something that is potentially a praiseworthy thing, right? Because there's hadith, for example, that says that if you were to think of doing something wrong and you act upon it, it gets written for you as doing one bad deed. But if you're to think of doing something wrong and didn't do it, then that actually gets written for you as a good deed, right? And then if you do think of something to do well and you act upon it subsequently, there's different multiples there also. But it's not easy to sometimes be in a place where you refrain from doing the things that kind of transgress the boundaries, right? May Allah make us from amongst those who honor His Sharia and are kind to others who struggle with different things. But this was a regular practice. We want also just think about this societally, what's going on in relation to just now revealed religion, and where wahi comes at the age of 40, it's not as if wahi was coming a week earlier someplace else, but there's a substantial amount of time that passes between Isa alayhi salam and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam being in this world. Do you know? And what does that mean and the implications of some of those things? But what we really want to focus on for today is this practice of tahannuth, that is this solitude. And in Mecca, this wasn't something that only the Prophet ﷺ did, but it was something that different people in the Meccan society did. And when they're seeking this solitude, they're engaged in this reflective practice that enables them to also think a little bit more deeply around what it is that they should be doing. A common characteristic of some of the people that engaged in this practice was that they were identified as being Hanif in Arabic. People who professed a monotheism, didn't have a revealed Sharia that they were following. And there is theory in Arabic language where you have letters that share the same root, that you can see a common kind of theme and connection, right? Islam, Muslim, Salam, that, all has the root letter Salama, and we can see what the commonality is there. But there's also theory that says that if the letters follow kind of congruence in some capacity, but there's change in the root structure in the ends of the lettering, that there is still like a commonality that's there, right? So, for example, the word nafs is from nafasa, right? But you have, in Surah Al-Falaq, it says nafathati fil uqad, right? Nafatha, right? You see what I mean? So the first two letters are the same, but the next letter is different. There's kind of a commonality in the meaning of what these words are about, So Hanatha and Hanafa, you have kind of this similar understanding that's there too, right? Where Hinth is about kind of engaging in things that one should not, and being Hanif is somebody who essentially is now professing kind of this monotheism in a sea that is absent of this. Does that make sense? So some would also say that the practice was called tahannuf with a fa at the end, or would refer to it in that way as well. Why do you think this practice of solitude is an important part in the pre-revelation phase of the Prophet's life? It's not something that he engages in thereafter, but it's something that is taking place with regularity. And there's various understandings that the Prophet had different people in his family who would engage in this as a practice, other people who contemporarily existed. But just the idea, and before we talk about that, like, what is this also, right? Because we live in a city that literally there's people on the streets constantly. We're not in parts of the country that everything just shuts down by a certain hour. I was giving a talk in Ohio. I don't know if anybody here is from Ohio or has been to Ohio before, but I was speaking in like a keynote in the morning time. And because it's also Ohio, there's not a flight every hour out of the airport in Ohio. And I now had a flight that was scheduled for the next day, but I was done by noon. And there is nothing to do there. And it's not even exaggeration. Everything that you would stereotypically understand things to be, the hangout place was this giant Walmart that everyone went to, and that also closed at 7 o'clock at night. Do you know? And so I reached out to the organizers and I said, I just want to go home. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to change my flight because I'm not trying to sit in this, hotel for the next 24 hours doing what exactly? But fundamentally, there just wasn't anything that could be done that didn't require having access to a car, driving miles away, like knowing many people in the locale, versus here, you can get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go buy milk somewhere, you know? And everything that's open isn't necessarily only vice, right? But there's things that you can engage in. They're still like meaningful, can be rooted in our tradition very deeply, are not outside the confines of it. But we can still have solitude, do you know? And so before we can understand why this is an important part in the pre-revelation phase of the prophet's life, we got to first know what it is. Do you know what is solitude? And so if you can just turn to the persons next to you, you take a couple of minutes, introduce yourselves if you don't know each other's name. If somebody was to ask you what solitude is, how would you identify that to them? Right? And it could be a person of any background. If my 8-year-old came up to you and said, what's solitude? Do you know? If somebody was 25 years old, arbitrary like their age, but if you had to give a definition to this practice, what would you identify it as? And principally, one of the things that can get us closer to a definition is understanding what something is by understanding what it's not also. Do you see what I mean? Right? So it's not one of those things that we want to just say solitude is about being alone, because that doesn't work. Do you know? I was alone in Ohio and I was miserable. Like every part of me just was like, I need to go back home. I need to go back home right now. Right? So that's not solitude. Do you understand? Even though I'm alone. So if you turn to the persons next to you, like, what is this thing? Do you know? Within the confines of spirituality, within the confines of ritual, practice, but we need a working definition before we can then delve into why it's such a necessary ingredient in the prophet's life, that both pre-revelation as well as post-revelation, it's something that's there with consistency as a practice. Does that make sense? So you can turn to the persons next to you, like, what is this thing of solitude to begin with? And then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm happy to see you.
You doing okay?
I'm doing
good to see you.
It's really good to see you.
I didn't get to give anybody those beads, man.
No problem.
And I left all my stuff at home, but I'll give it to you next time I see you. Is that okay?
Keep it. Give it
Yeah.
to your son or something.
Yeah.
I got something for him and you.
Oh, is that cool for you?
I know you said they like basketball.
That's so kind of you. You didn't have to do that.
So,
Yeah, thanks, man.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you for 2023. Everything you've done.
Alhamdulillah. Exactly. Yeah. Are you sticking around?
Yeah, I'm gonna be here.
Okay,
I
we'll
gotta
catch
leave
up soon.
early, but yeah,
I don't think we're gonna go so late today. I flew back in a little while ago, so we might go a little less than
You're tough.
normally do. Yeah. We'll see how it goes, man. Take a seat.
Yeah.
We'll catch up. Sure. Okay, so what is this thing? If we talk about solitude, like what are we talking about here in this context? What do we discuss?
The solitude of the night.
The solitude of the night? Yeah. What does that mean?
Like, for example, some people say solitude and comfort, but you imagine a dark street in a white neighborhood. Once it hits dark, so it's downright solitude.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna say something?
Yeah, we talked about solitude in like a positive sense, in the sense that it's a form of being alone, but it has multiple components to it. One of them is that it's like more intentional, like deliberate. For example, when you were in Ohio, you were kind of put into a situation you didn't want to be in.
Oh my God, I definitely didn't want to be in it. It's the worst thing in my life. Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
But in terms of like, when we were talking about solitude in a more positive sense, that's, for example, when the Prophet Muhammad went into the cave, it's more of a deliberate, intentional act for a purpose. That purpose could be growth or transformation. The other thing we talked about is kind of being free from distraction. And potentially that could even mean that you could be in a state of solitude even with other people around you. And it's more of like a mental state.
Yeah, amazing. This is a key characteristic to understanding solitude. Solitude is about being away from distractions. Solitude is not about being away from people. It's about being away from distractions. You were going to say something?
Yes, I always thought solitude would mean that finding your own strength and freedom in your own independent state.
Great. So now we're away from distractions, not people, to achieve what, right? And a part of it can get rooted in this response of understanding kind of your own independent state, strengths, etc. But this question is going to be important. Why? Because most of you in this room do not know how to be alone with yourself. You might think that you do, but you really don't. And we have hadith that tell us various things, right? That kullukum ra'in, all of you are shepherds, and all of you are responsible for your sheep. And we've talked about this in different settings, but you have a dual role as a shepherd and as a sheep. You think about as a sheep, the sheep is more vulnerable to what's predatorial when they're by themselves than when they're in a group. Do you know? But I can be more susceptible to different adversaries that are spiritual in their nature. Dunya, the materialistic world. Waswasa, the whispers of shaitan. The nafs, the lower self, the ego. Hawa, desire. Like this comes up a lot when I'm by myself, not when I'm around people, you know? And spiritual growth necessitates understanding that growth can't exist without something to improve upon. So you don't want to hate on yourself, which is another tool of shaitan. May Allah protect us from it. But to just be real with oneself. right? So it's hard to sometimes be alone, which we want to get into here. When you don't have self-care, when you're exhausted, right? The thoughts that just kind of become pervasive when you're by yourself rather than when people become really hard to engage in. This is why solitude in our tradition is not about being away from people. It's about being away from distractions that can then help you to understand both outward and inward distractions. The majority of people I talk to in my office who are at their wits' end when there's no self-care and they're exhausted, and I say to them, when do these thoughts come up? They're usually by themselves, right? And when they're running on empty, and then the thoughts just become heavier and heavier, and they're alone, the prescription isn't about, well, just now go sit by yourself in a mountain, but it's who you're sitting with is also important. Do you get what I mean? Why a lot of us don't engage in it as a regular practice is not just because we are bad people. You're all good people. But societally, it's not emphasized, this idea, and you want to be able to incentivize it for yourself to think out, what is it that I'm gaining from saying yes to this and in turn no to something else? So what do you get by engaging in regular periods of positive solitude? Yeah.
Purification.
Purification of what?
Your spiritual practice, your role within the culture that you may belong to. And this brother here specifically added the recentering of God in your life.
Yeah. You gonna say something?
I was gonna say just inner peace, and I think a state of being. I feel like during like Ramadan, for example, a lot of us outside of our own like jobs, communities have to be in a state of solitude, away from like society, because we're practicing a fast, and in that time, a lot of us feel like this is the most inner peace, or the most close to God that we felt in a long time. I think it's just being a state of being that starts mentally and goes spiritually as well.
Amazing. What else can you gain in moments of solitude? Yeah.
You get an understanding of what you truly need from your Creator.
Yeah. And all of these can be lumped categorically into a bucket of contemplation and reflection. If the outward is agitated and the inward is agitated, then both are not a formula for reflection. If the outward is agitated but the inward is not agitated, you could be going to work, but now you're in a state where the inner is not about the deprivation of food for the stomach, but it's about the fullness of your heart and the kind of satisfaction of your soul. It allows for you to still have moments of clarity when the inner self is in a place of contentment and the outer self is experiencing now what is just chaos around you. But if the combination of the two are in a place that is devoid of agitation, but also has the presence of calmness and stillness, that's a great formula to gain insight, to gain foresight, to engage in hindsight, right? And these are all things that are intrinsically rooted in the ability to know oneself a little bit better in order to achieve this contentment. And the act in and of itself is not what is inner peace. That's the potential consequence of the act. So we want to be able to understand the building blocks that get us to that place so that we can understand that it doesn't have to be consistently, daily and weekly, that I'm spending hours engaged in this practice, nor does it mean that I just sit with myself and I now have to confront things that I just like to pretend don't exist. But I figure out a healthy mechanism for me that also has stages to get to this place. You got to understand this in the light of everything we talked about in the prophetic biography. Do you know what I mean? Right? Does the Prophet love Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha? Huh? He does, right? It's not a trick question, right? He does, right? We don't even have a major life event that takes place from 25 to 35 that's discussed in the books of Seerah because he's just focused on his family. Right? So where he has a home that he loves to be in. He's not seeking solitude as an escape from reality. He's not running away. He likes where he's at. Do you know what I mean? And he's still doing this thing. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's not like, I hate my family, I need to run away. I hate the people I work with, I need to run away. I hate myself, I need to run away from everything that reminds me of all these things. This is a man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who walks into a room and the chieftains of the tribes of Mecca who are ready to hurt one another because they want to decide how the Kaaba is rebuilt, who does what side, who's going to build what part. And every time there's a disagreement, they're ready to just go at it. We're going to put the black stone back. They walked in, As-Sadiq al-Amin, Radina, Radina, rejoice, rejoice, the trustworthy one is here. Don't you think that he knows that people think about him this way? It's not that his life is in this place where it's filled at this point with any kinds of what we have in terms of anxiety triggers and stresses. He likes his wife. He's got tough things happening. We talked about his children passing away. He's burying these children, other stuff that's going on. But overall, if we were to say, what's the temperature of the Prophet's life up until this point? Seems like he's in a happy place, mashallah, right? And contentment stays with him throughout his entire journey in this world. So, as much as we understand principally, solitude isn't about being away from people, it's about being away from distractions. Principle number 2 that you want to understand, solitude isn't meant to be an escape from reality, but it's meant to be the mechanism through which we enhance the understanding of the reality we find ourselves in. In order to do that, the example of Ramadan is really great, because you have hadith that tell you that people who meet the month of Ramadan and are still not forgiven, the Prophet is making du'as and saying ameen to some of these du'as that are being taken place because how can you experience barakah? It's like showering you, If I dumped a bucket of water on your face and you somehow still didn't get wet, right? It's just not fundamentally possible. So you don't have to know what's going on in order for you to understand the experience. But just as we're saying that experience in Ramadan, the fasting, the nature of the month on a whole, the Quran recitations, the breaking of fasts, and being in the company of people or even being by yourself, but if you figured out how it worked and just thought about what was really contributing to it, then you could still probably maintain it a little bit more after Ramadan. Because why wouldn't you want to feel that peace, man, outside of Ramadan? Why would you situate yourself in shaitan's trap to say it's only because it's Ramadan? That's like saying, I only lost weight because I was mindful of what I was eating. Yeah, that's the whole thing, right? But that doesn't mean then a month later you're hating on yourself. But if you understand what is actually transpiring, it's going to enable you to stick a little bit closer to it and implement what you can in the moments that you can in order to achieve what? Contentment. You don't feel the same thing that you feel when you're in this place where you have just awareness and consciousness and knowing of things. And then you don't have to turn to the things that just numb pain and create more distractions, and you have to engage in the pursuit of complacency. I don't need to smoke this thing. I don't need to drink this thing. I don't need to watch this thing. I don't need to listen to this thing. I don't need to hate myself because I struggle with those things. Reflection and contemplation helps me to know who my God is, helps me to understand my strengths and where it is that I can function in a state of autonomy. It renders for me now an opportunity. It won't work if you're trying to run away from reality. Do you understand? So part number 2, it's not about an escape. Because the Prophet, he came back down from the mountain and went back to his people. Do you understand? What else can we say are some of the gains of this thing? Or what does it look like to be in solitude? Does anybody have any regular practices they engage in? You do? Not being bothered by anything? Yeah, maybe, right? But the nature of reflection and contemplation is not just these epiphanatic moments. And that's why it's important sometimes to not be alone with it, because sometimes what surfaces is really hard to actually confront. All kinds of things that can come up where I might just need somebody that is giving me a shoulder to shed some tears on. Or I need somebody who helps me to not run away from certain things. Do you see what I mean? So we want to use language in a way where we understand we're subservient to it. Just because something makes me uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not a necessary part to my spiritual growth. And I could tuck away all kinds of things in the back of my head and pretend like they're not there. But at some point or another, that reality is going to hit me in my face. So reflection and contemplation in the immediate isn't always just about, man, this was an amazing thing. Sometimes it can be exhausting. Sometimes it can leave you feeling really, really just broken. But that's sometimes necessary to build it up as a source of strength. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? So the goal is not complacency. And contentment can coexist with sadness, with grief, with anxiety. The Prophet ﷺ is the most content human being to ever live. He shed tears as his son Ibrahim is taking his last breaths in front of his eyes. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, Abu Talib passed away in the same year. When we get to this next year, we're talking about the Seerah, this is the year of sadness, Am al-Huzn, the year of grief, right? And try to remember these things in light of what we've talked about already. They only name years when there's like major things that are happening. Right? The year of the elephant, Am al-Fil, is the year that the Prophet is born. You know? So it's associated with this major event, right? So Am al-Huzn is not named as a joke, but it's the year that the Prophet of God was wrestling with the loss of his loved ones. He experiences a lot of different difficulty, but the nature societally of why they name these things is attached to major life events. So Abraha coming with the elephants to destroy the Kaaba is magnificent enough of an experience that the year is named the year of the elephant. And the sadness of the Prophet is something that is so concrete that the year is called the year of sadness. Do you understand? It can coexist with contentment and balance. Do you get what I mean? And we want to have definitions to these words so we're not chasing after ambiguity, right? If I say to you, go over there, do you know? And that's just what I said. And then I yelled at you. I was like, why haven't you gone yet? Do you know? And all of you just went to different places. What is it that is really there that's concrete? But if you know the word table, and you know the word live stream, and you know the word cell phone, inside and out, that it's a common definition, right? If I had this thing right here, and I said to everybody, where's my phone? All of you know that this is what I'm talking about. Regardless of how different you are in professional ambition, in terms of affluence and influence. What's up, man? I haven't seen you in so long. You good?
Yeah.
MashaAllah, you look good. You get to a place where you have a working definition that's concrete. And socially, you've either been taught a definition or somebody sat you down and said to you, this is what this word means, right? My daughter is got vocab quizzes in school now. Do you know? Right? And she asked me questions, man. Like, she's doing all kinds of math, and she's like, Baba, what is the volume of this and this and that? I'm like, listen, let me tell you something. I don't know the answers to these questions. Do you know? I'm not going to lie to you, and it's okay, right? But you can learn those definitions in those ways. You didn't go to 6th grade and somebody said to you, define love for me, right? You didn't go to middle school and somebody said, define compassion, define contentment. You probably never had someone actually say to you who is God to you also, where you were able to just kind of contemplate and reflect. And it's not just a rote memorization that you're regurgitating now. And so as we go through this is going to be important to understand. You want to define what this word means. These two are going to be hand in hand. And the second is something that has to be what you identify fully, because it's a part of what actual submission to God renders, and that is contentment. So word number 1, what is solitude? And word number 2, what is contentment? And again, you can identify it by what it's not. Do you understand? Okay. So now we want to talk about all of this in the light of the prophetic biography, right? That this has been posited the last 3 months of our conversations, that everything we're discussing is rooted in now what is getting the prophet ready to be the prophet of God, right? So why is this a practice that makes sense, that is part of his regular kind of practice prior to revelation? This society has a lot of unique aspects to it that seemingly exist just in conflict with each other, but still simultaneously, you know? These are people who, when they're trying to figure out how to put the black stone back in its place, they pray to the Lord of the house for guidance. But there's still a people who bury their daughters alive. So they have a consciousness of a divine being, and potentially some of them many divine entities, but there's no sense of accountability. And so we want to think in this society that also is riddled with inequity, a lot of lying. There's absence of just good treatment, as much as there is people who engage in hospitality and other things. Why is the prophet doing this regularly? And how does it fit into what it is that is forthcoming? Do you understand the question? Like, where does this play a role in what's going to come? Why is this something that is helpful? We talked about his being a shepherd, which is also a different form of solitude, right? We talked about him going on these caravan routes, which also he's probably spending a lot of time with himself. Do you know what I mean? I was just in Egypt. I landed earlier today, and I flew out on Monday. I don't know if any of you ever flown Egypt Air before. Has anybody ever flown Egypt Air before? You have? Do you like it? You don't like it. Yeah. There's nobody that likes it. You raised your hand?
Yeah, it's same.
Huh?
Same. It's gotten better, I will say that.
It's gotten better in comparison to what?
Exactly.
My friend Ibad, who's sitting right here, we went for Umrah once. I hope you're okay with me telling this story, because I'm going to tell it anyway. And the flight crew fell asleep as we were descending back to New York. And they decided to serve breakfast on descent. And then Ibad went to the restroom. And as he was leaving the restroom, the stewardess pushed him back into the restroom and said, "We're going to land," and then made him sit on the toilet for the next 20 minutes as we landed, right? Yeah. Egypt Air. So I thought I was going to be on this flight, and it's 10 hours going in, about 11 and a half coming back, and I was like, okay, I'll catch up on work. And I looked up online, does Egypt Air have Wi-Fi? And it said, yes, it does. It did not. And now for 10 hours going in and 11 hours going back, there's people on this plane, but I'm not talking to them. So 21 hours of my life between Monday afternoon and Wednesday afternoon was me stuck in this bus in the sky. How much time do you think the Prophet spent on these caravan routes? Just him and his partner, him by himself. It's a solitude. Do you understand? In addition to now these retreats that are deliberate for multiple days, weeks at a time, and where and how from this we'll talk about before the night is over. Also why it's important to understand in your partnership with people, like the spouse you choose has to be in a place where you're willing to support one another in your own self-care practices. Because the Prophet isn't sitting in the cave of Hira and saying to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, hey, you come sit with me too. Do you know? You're not marrying yourself. Do you know what I mean? Right? But she's still playing a role in the support of the Prophet of God. Do you know? And they have that understanding of one another. Do you get what I mean? So why is this something that we see and deepening in this understanding? We talked about this when we talked about him being a shepherd. He's just hanging out with his sheep all day, right? You know, it's not kind of you walk into a store today and people are all on their cell phones and everybody's talking to each other, you know, and people are in this place where it's not necessarily in that state. He's outside with these things. It's solitude. So it's a regular part of his routine from the time that he is a young person. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Why? Why do we think this is? If you could turn to the persons next to you, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead.
There's no book, right? He doesn't have any book. So the purpose of life, like trying to connect to meaning and as a father, as a family.
Why do we think solitude was a part of the pre-revelation period of the Prophet's life?
Purpose of life and
In your school? In your school? Did you go to an Islamic school? Yeah. So I didn't go to an Islamic school either. I didn't go to an Islamic school either.
Oh, but of course you learn Quran, Mufti, right? Alim, yeah.
You go to like Sunday schools and things too. They might teach you if you read the Seerah literature.
Sunday Islam?
Sunday school? Did you go to Sunday school growing up? Did you go to like a weekend Islamic school? A lot of people don't. Yeah. They don't. Yeah. We just kind of learn from what our parents teach us or khutbahs and stuff. We come to classes like this.
So what's the difference between regular Islamic school and Sunday school?
Islamic school is like full-time schools. So you go there, you do all the math, science, whatever. But like in New York at the 96th Street, they have a masjid there. And then they have an Islamic school. A weekend school is you go for a few hours in the week, on a Sunday or Saturday. And then there's a madrasa where you're just studying like Quran, you can study, you can become, do.
Yeah, but Islamic school is, if you're a boy, they don't want so many boys. If you're a girl, only girls, right?
It could be. Depends on what age.
No, it has to be like that because that's how it is in Islam.
Yeah. Let me get everyone back. Okay. So what do we think? Why is this like a key part to the pre-revelation kind of life of the Prophet of God, alayhi salam? She said something good. Yeah. Go ahead. What did you say?
Oh, but I can't remember because we were talking about so many.
What did she say?
Oh, the first thing?
Yeah.
Oh, if you know yourself, then you're more perceptive to guidance.
Yeah. Why? Like how? How though is that? How can we demonstrate that? Yeah.
It's like if you're used to practicing solitude in like small portions, right? Then when that moment of large solitude comes around, you're not fully overwhelmed. And so maybe for the prophet, like being able to practice solitude, being a shepherd, and all these little things made that longer period of solitude later in life more useful and more effective, and able to get through that.
But to achieve what? Like, why is that an important thing? Yeah.
Potentially for wisdom. I think wisdom is being able to be open-minded, outwardly, and be able to be observant and have a growing perspective, while also being very content and understanding who you are. So it's like understanding what is, with having an open mind of what could be. And I feel like solitude is something that is needed in order to achieve that, because you're listening to yourself, you're listening to God, and you're watching the world. And I feel like the smartest people are those who listen. And if you're able to listen in those moments when it matters, when people need answers, you can probably give an answer.
Amazing. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Purpose of life.
Purpose of life. What does that mean?
So, in solitude and self-reflection, you see signs. You see signs and connect to a higher being.
So all of these things, plus what we said in the previous kind of round of discussions around the prompt, couldn't that be applicable to anybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, right? So isn't that the whole point of it all? That at the end of the day, our prophet is still existing on a very human level because he's human. And that accessibility through this kind of tangible engagement, but everything that you and I are meant to gain through religion, so through the Prophet ﷺ, we gain it as he gains it through his own practice. He's still praying Fajr, right? The Prophet doesn't get to not pray Fajr. If anything, he's got to pray Tahajjud. Do you know what I mean? He's still fasting Ramadan the way that you fast Ramadan. So the Quranic verse is still applicable to him in whatever capacity we can imagine that becomes applicable to what we know is al-insan al-kamil, right? The kind of complete human being. Do you see? But he's still human. And if all of these things are important enough that Allah is leading him to prophethood, but through successive eras of his life, his existence, his progression through stages of life, there is a consistent engagement of periods of solitude. Don't you think it's important for you to have this too? Solitude is when big things happen. And not just to the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad, but we see it in our tradition more broadly, applicable to many luminaries. Maryam, peace be upon her, she is in the temple at a time when, forget about most people, like women definitely weren't doing this. And she is now in the temple in this solitude. Musa alayhi salam, Moses, peace be upon him, he is in solitude from the Bani Israel for 40 days. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he's in the fire, and the fire is commanded to be cool, he's not in the fire for moments. They say he's in the fire for a long period of time, and he says that those were the best days of my life. That he's in this place. What is happening there? When I'm on this Egypt Air flight, look at the comparison centuries later. You guys are so screwed. You got someone wretched like me running this community, right? You know, no Wi-Fi means I'm not connected to anything. So 21 hours where the distractions are just all away. if I could tell you, like, the kind of things I'm thinking about in this plane, who I'm thinking about, what I'm thinking about, the kind of du'as that I can make, the nature of my prayer on this plane. In the solitude where they experience now these things that are heightened in terms of impact, the receipt of revelation is not something that comes with ease. The Prophet thinks he lost his mind. He thinks he's been possessed by demons and jinns. And the literal act of receiving revelation, we have hadith that tell us from companions whose limbs are under the Prophet at that time that the heaviness was something they had never experienced before. The Prophet is mounted on the camel just goes to the ground. It's literal heaviness. If you are in a place where you are at the other end of the spectrum, think about when you are running on empty. You are spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally just strained. Now the slightest of things can just come and knock you down, and you're pushed over. To be able to retain what is the heaviness of wahi has to be in a place where it's the equivalent of when you have seen someone who is miraculous in their physical capacity. You know? Like if you ever met somebody who's a real athlete before, do you know what I mean? And they can do these crazy things, athletic feats that normal human beings, like I could never do that, do you know? Right? Like if you ever see little kids in your life and they see someone like flipping over, like actual standing on their feet and flipping over, and my kids, they're like, I can do that too. I'm like, yeah, let me show me, right? And then all they do is jump up and down and then land back down, right? And then they try to do it a few more times. But what's amazing is they haven't lost their sense of self-confidence that makes them try, right? When you get older, you just stop trying, you know? But in being able to understand, to get themselves to a place where they're in a ring, where they're hitting each other in the face again and again, they train for months to get ready for that. To get to a place where you run 25 miles, you do a lot to get to a place of peak performance, right? The Prophet is in a place that his heart is being readied, but his physical self also has to be readied because it's all connected to one another. Do you get what I mean? What do you think he's eating when he's in this solitude? What do you think he's consuming? There's nobody there, so he can't hear anybody gossip. He can't hear anybody lie. He can't hear anybody be iniquitous. He's not surrounded by what is governing the Meccan society at that time when he's in this cave that is far away from it all on his own. So the consumption of what is negative is gone, and the consumption of what is positive is present because you are in this place where there's nobody else there to speak these things into your being. And then he's strong enough to hold revelation. Musa alayhi salam speaks to Allah. Maryam, peace be upon her, gets fruit from nowhere. And when Zakaria alayhi salam asks, like, where did this come from? It's from Allah. And so, where and how, it's a necessary part to not isolate. We're not a people that believe that the prayer that we pray is only about our spiritual elevation, but the prayer that you pray also is about physical, mental, and emotional strength and replenishment, because all of you is connected to the rest of you. Do you get what I mean? If I stuck a pencil in your hand, the tears come from your eyes, and you don't feel pain just in one part of your body. Your body is now in a place where all of it erupts, and you're going to scream from your mouth. Why are you screaming from your mouth when your hand got hurt? When you feel really sad, you don't feel it just in the palm of your hand. You feel it everywhere. Sometimes you can't even get out of bed because you're so sad. All of you is connected to the rest of you. So that understanding of the solitude that he's experiencing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's going to create also a capacity that he goes through these phases, but still has to come to a place of recognition that says, I am the last prophet of God. Forget about anybody else thinking that you're nuts. Can you imagine if you had to come to a place of reconciling what this responsibility actually meant? When I was in the delivery room with Priya when Medina was born, it's crazy to watch a child be born. And if you're in a place where you choose to not see your child be born, you're making the worst decision of your life. And when I'm holding my child in my hands, who for 9 months has existed in my wife's womb, it's just so different now. Oh my God, I am a father. You see what I mean? And when that reality hits, there's all kinds of different things that can pop into your head. Responsibilities, accountabilities, that don't necessarily come to the forefront when you're in a place where thinking is myopic and you don't see that your prayer is not just for you, your prayer is for all of us. The responsibilities that come into play as we have maturation in our existence. The 2-year-old isn't responsible for anything that the 22-year-old is responsible for, that the 42-year-old, the 52, the 72-year-old, it varies as you go from phase to phase. He has to not just be strong enough to experience wahi, he has to be strong enough to go home, tell his wife this is what happened, let it all out, and then be open to the conversations that are going to come after the fact that say, this is now something that exists on my shoulders. When you're running around and all you're doing is feeding your physical self, responsibility becomes harder to uphold. When all you're doing is feeding your stomach, and when you're in a place where you're chasing dunya, and you don't have any time to think or contemplate, this is why the understanding is that the moments that allow for that muscle of reflection to grow in these moments that it's not compelled, that I have to figure out, what does it mean that my parents don't want me to marry this woman? What does it mean that I have to pursue a job that I don't want to be in? What does it mean that I'm trying to figure out, not with ambiguity, but with substance, purpose, objectives, all of these kinds of things? If you've never sat down to actually think, and whenever you're sitting down, you always have something to retreat to that is not spiritually enhancing, and you've never learned how to be alone with yourself, how can you be alone with everything that exists inside of you? You see? And so that's not an easy transition, that you went from being a shepherd to a merchant to these things. And now you have to come to terms with the fact that you are not just a prophet, but you are the last messenger to mankind. And think about it in terms of what we said last week. How many years between Jesus, peace be upon him, and Muhammad, peace be upon him? How many years? It's not like when you go to the lands where there's an abundance of prophets that you can go to Palestine, may Allah end the occupation that's taking place there and make us a generation that witnesses a free Palestine in our lifetime. You can go, and it's crazy the number of prophets that are attached to that particular piece of land in this earth. Nobody was in this place. Some of these Jewish tribes, there's some indication. Some of these other scriptures, a prophet's going to come, these are these signs. But the norm wasn't that one day A shepherd who was an orphan from Mecca is going to become the last messenger to all of humanity. And all of those real things have to surface so you can have accessibility to your prophet, to be able to understand when he has to reconcile something that's very heavy. These are the tools that are built into his routine to help him get to these places, to then be able to make a determination of what reality is in front of him and then move forward as best as he possibly can. Do you get what I mean? Right? I'm not ready to be a dad yet. There's no room for that. I don't want to be the prophet of God. No, like, where can he say this? And you think about what religion means. God wants me to dress this way and pray this way and eat this way and do this. This man is told, you are the last messenger to all of mankind. There's not an option that's there. And love becomes a critical variable in the motivation of all of this, because there's no resentment, there's no bitterness. I couldn't do this with my life because I got married to you. I couldn't do this with my life because we had you. I couldn't do this because we had to do this or we had to do that. He's still teaching you that smiling is a charity. He's still teaching you that Allah is beautiful and loves that which is beautiful. Do you see what I mean? The contemplative moments, the solitude, the reflection, the rejuvenation through stillness and silence, it all contributes to the ability to weather all of these things and then pass on teachings that are rooted in what is selflessness and interdependence, not something that is myopic and egocentric. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? What I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you. Where do you go to find stillness? Because modernity has really amazing things. Look at how spoiled we are, right? My expectation is that when I get onto a flying vehicle, I am still able to access the internet as I fly over oceans, right? Do you see? That's like where we're at. Entitlement, exceptionalism. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? In being able to understand, modernity offers to us amazing things that didn't exist before. You can argue both ends of it. Is it a positive or a negative? And it's hard. Some of these things are not just in these boxes with ease. But there are certain gaps that exist in the prism of modernity. And one glaring gap is a diminishing of places of stillness. Where do you go to be away from distractions? Not to be away from people. Where do you go where you can recenter yourself so that you can reclaim the ability? Everybody thinks. Right now, you are thinking right now something. And all of us, we are consuming whatever it is that's coming to us, but uniquely, which is crazy to think about, just even in terms of the people in this room, each one of us is distinctively choosing how we process what it is, right, that's thrown at us. Some of you are looking out this window. Some of you are looking out that window. Some of you are hearing what I'm saying. Some of you are hearing what's on the street. Some of you are hearing both of them but not listening to either because your mind is in a state where your eyes are glazed over, right? None of it's good or bad. Do you know what I mean? But where do you go when you want to fine-tune sensory perception? Where do you go where you can actually reclaim not the ability to think because everybody thinks, but the ability to choose what you think about and how you think about the things that you think about? Can you imagine how miserable my day would be if I got on this plane? I was like, man, there's no internet on this plane. And then when I got back on the plane, I was like, there's still no, what was going to happen in like 15 hours? They didn't magically install Wi-Fi on this entire fleet of, 20-year-old planes, right? But contentment becomes intrinsically linked to this. Because how you see something doesn't tell you about what you're looking at. How you see something tells you about yourself. And when you have the strength to be able to still love yourself, despite knowing all the wrong that you have done, or the shortcomings and areas of improvement that you have, then shaitan can't get you in that way. It's not an unhealthy love that breeds arrogance, but a healthy love that breeds confidence, that also understands who Allah is and recognizes what that relationship is to the divine. So if you turn to the person next to you, where do you go for stillness? Where do you find it? Somebody came to you and they're new to New York City. They came from Ohio where everything closes at 7. And they're like, what is this place? Where are the trees? Nobody talks to each other. All these kinds of things. Where would you tell them to go to find stillness? How to find some rest? So if you can talk to the people around you, yourself too, how do you build it into your routine? And to be comfortable when you sit with your sisters and brothers to say that, I don't actually do this thing. You know? And then you can then think out, well, where could I go to do it? And how do I build it into my routine? But if we could talk about it for a bit and then come back and discuss, and then we'll...
It doesn't matter if it's summertime and there's like people everywhere, or it's wintertime and it's etc. Whether I'm walking, just walking, get out of the subway. And so it doesn't matter if it's subway
Okay, so where are some of the places? Where would we go? How would one do this? Where do you go to find stillness and solitude?
Nature. We're talking about nature.
Nature? Yeah, so where is that?
Park.
A park? Yeah, great. Huh? Other thoughts? Yeah.
We talked about like sunrises or sunsets or anywhere where you're like reminded of like the glory of God or whatever. And she talked about like journaling is a good way to find stillness, and then fasting was another one. When you're not constantly thinking about like the things you want or what you don't have, and you're kind of like hungry and don't really have the energy to be thinking about those things, you can find stillness and like the important thoughts.
Yeah. Great. Other thoughts?
Meditation.
Meditation, yeah. Yeah, and so think about, even in these examples, why? Like, why is being in nature something that yields this? Why, when you look at a sunrise, or why when you fast, or why when you journal? These are different things, but they have similar results, potentially. But what's happening there when you do that? Yeah.
You're going within yourself and finding simplicity.
Yeah. So if I'm in this, let's use the sunrise as an example, okay? I sit down to watch the sunrise. Where am I watching it rise? The sky, yes, the sky. Yes, thank you. Yes. Outdoors. Where? So the sun in this scenario is outdoors and in the sky. I'm glad we established these things. So where am I? Am I in New York? Am I someplace else? Where am I at?
Rooftop.
You're on your roof in New York City. You're watching the sun rise. What is happening when you are doing this? Like, visualize it in your head. Huh? It's a calm setting, right? So you're now in this calm space. The sun is rising. So New York hasn't woken up yet, right? What else is going on? It's changing colors. So how do you know that?
Through my eyes.
You're looking at it, right? So you're seeing it from here. What is happening as you're seeing it?
My heart is getting fonder.
Okay, and why? Why do you think that is?
Because it's connected.
What's connected?
Like my eyes and my heart and my mind is like what my eyes see, it's connected and reflects it on other parts of my body as well.
But you're looking right now, right? Like, you're looking at me. Your heart's not getting full the way you see the sun. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? I'm glad you're agreeing with me. Thank you. Yeah. But why? What's happening when you're looking at the sun that it's having that impact?
I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but I was just thinking like it's reminding us of God, right? Like
How? Why? Yeah.
Thinking of how it came to be, or like how.
Yeah, but why? Why are you thinking that? Like, you're not looking at me being like, why did God make this thing? Do you know what I mean? Right? What is happening when you're looking at the sun in this setting that it's evoking these thoughts? Yeah.
I think there's like an awestruck with like the transition. It's like you think about change and how it's like there's always like that struggling with change that we have with our own lives, but subhanAllah, it's like it just happens so easily from dawn to like the setting of the sun to the rising of the sun. It's just like change will always exist.
And it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful. Do you get what I mean? It's not ambiguously beautiful. Nobody ever sees the sun rising and setting, all of the oranges, and they're like, that's God got that wrong. Do you know? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Do you know what I mean? Right? No. They look at it, and it's always magnificent. You know? We were leaving from this warehouse in Cairo, driving back to where we were staying, and the sun was setting. It was Maghrib time, and I'm just staring out the window. And all of these thoughts that you're saying come up. The magnificence of the creator of this thing, and who is God, and all these feelings of whatever else. But it all stems from just first looking at something that is beautiful, but actually looking at it with presence and consciousness. Do you get what I mean? You can see something but not perceive it. But when you're in solitude and there's nothing else pulling you inwardly or outwardly away, you've combated the inner demons. You are in a place where you are now in control. The nafs is not in control. The stomach is not in control. The sexual organs are not in control. You are in control. And if just for 3 minutes as the sun rises, you can take in beauty, what do you think it would do to your heart if every single day you woke up for Fajr and you actually watched the sun rise? And not even just the physical sun. My kids and I, we sit on a couch in our apartment. While you've been in our apartment, you can see through the window. If you haven't been in our apartment, you will eventually, inshallah, right? It's not that serious, big deal. You know, everybody comes over. I mean, it's nice. We like having you over. But we're looking through the window, and in between these two buildings, there's just like one section where you can see the sky change color. It still looks beautiful. Why don't you look at beautiful things more? Why? What gets in the way? Like real beauty, not fake beauty. Real beautiful things. Why do you not? Why don't you listen to things that are beautiful more? And not just in terms of the melody of it or the harmony of it, but Why don't you listen to conversations that are filled with just good things? And if you can look at the sunrise and it fills your heart, then understand, it just takes a little bit of light to push away darkness. And the whole idea with solitude, and when you have a heavy world that you live in, sometimes also the abundance of darkness becomes the mechanism through which we can understand what is actually light. But if you don't think and take time to think and to perceive, you're not meant to live like a rock. If God wanted you to be a rock that just sits and does nothing, he would have made you a rock. You're not meant to be a dog that barks. If you were meant to be a dog that barks, then that's all you could do is bark all the time. But you've been given the ability to express. Why were you given the ability to express? So you can deepen in this capacity to just go more into saying, what are these things of beauty? And the secret, man, is not that you deny the beauty of the sunrise or the sunset, but the secret is there's beauty in everything. There's beauty in each one of you that's sitting here. And what the contemplative practice, the spiritual exercise that yields strength of a wakeful heart of the Prophet of God enabled, alayhi salam, was to see what was inherently beautiful in all of the people around him, including those that societally were the ones that were pushed down. And it also then enabled him to see what was ugly is actual ugliness. He didn't come to make excuses for inequity and oppression or racisms. He got cast out hard by his people. But he still saw truth as truth and falsehood as falsehood because he made the transition of just seeing to perceiving. Do you see? And these types of exercises help with it. So you go sit in nature and you find where you thrive. Some of us do better in the morning. Some of us do better at nighttime. Some of us are better in the cold. Some of us are better at night. Right? My daughter and I, we walked to school. She's like, Baba, I don't understand. It is 20 degrees and there's these kids in my class that show up in shorts. And I was like, baby, we are brown people. Like, we do not do this. Do you know? We are not made for this type of weather. Just, it's okay. Let them be. Allah bless them with something different from us. Do you know what I mean? But she's like, but how? How are they not cold? Right? I'm like, I don't know. You know? But in understanding that people can respond in different ways to different things. I'm 41 years old. I've been getting on planes on and off for weeks and months for like the last 20 years of my life. Somebody says to me, how is it possible? You flew to Egypt, stayed there for 18 hours and flew back and you're sitting here. Because I've been doing it for 20 years, man. That's not a comparative thing. There's a lot of things that people do just out of habit. Do you see? But what contemplation allows for us to do is to not have these delusional senses of self rooted in inferiority and superiority mindsets, a delusional sense of grandeur that I'm better than you, a delusional sense of insignificance that you're better than me. But interiority becomes what it is that we get motivated by. I'm not in competition with you. You're not in competition with me. I'm just trying to be the best version of myself and not be afraid to meet the person that I can actually become tomorrow. Cognitive capacity becomes a necessary component to it. So when the Quran says that they're like the cattle, ulaika kal an'am, don't be like a cow, be human. The sun doesn't know how beautiful it is when it rises and sets. You are the only part of creation that can do this. Why? Why was it given to you? And what dulls it and numbs it is all of the stuff that's built to throw you into chaos and frenzy. Does that make sense? So you find stillness, you find solitude, you find good people that you enjoy being in their company, get away with them for certain amounts of time. Be purposeful in what it is that you have going on. It doesn't have to be every moment of every day. But if 9 to 5 looks a certain way, then 5 to 9 can also look a different way. It can be seasonal, right? The Prophet ﷺ engaged in spiritual retreat at the end of Ramadan consistently. The i'tikaf. What's happening? Have any of you ever done i'tikaf before?
Yeah.
You have? Where did you do it?
Masjid.
Which, in New York?
Yeah.
How many people were there? Was it just you and the masjid alone?
No, a few bunch.
There was a lot of people, right?
Less, oh, not a lot, but
It was more than you? Great, right? You go, and there's people there. So you're not away from people, you're away from distractions. You're just consuming what is positive. Recitation of Quran. There's a lot of silence. Silence is an amazing thing. And we're going to wrap up, because we got to wrap up. But what cannot be seen as just rhetoric, but the kind of irony of it is that you need contemplation to be able to reach a conclusion that regains your capacity, that breaks down, because this becomes the biggest disruptor of all of it. And it's purposeful. If you are distracted, then you're not as present when there's things that only you can take on come in front of you. Why do you think Allah gives you the skills that He gives to you? Why did He give you the wealth that He gives to you? Why did He give you the people in your life that He gave to you? Right? I sat down with a bunch of people yesterday in Egypt, and they're saying, like, how do you do this? I'm saying, because I can. That's why I have to. It doesn't have to turn into burdensome responsibility, but can you imagine? Think about, and I'm so proud of this community. In a week, we raised over $1 million on this campaign after we had already raised $1.2 million on a previous campaign for Palestine. And may Allah increase us in our generosity, but in being able to understand, like, $1 million is no joke, man. Right? So, what would I say to God? That I just wanted to spend the last week of exams with students at NYU, or, it's cold outside, or I wasn't feeling this or that. The recognition of responsibility can actually be liberating, because then the motivation can be something where I can understand not any one of you would tell me that there was something wrong if I didn't go. So I can do it purely out of just love and want, and it's still being something that fulfills responsibility, right? And may Allah make us from the mukhlisin. But to understand it, that it has to sometimes come from reflection and contemplation. And I'm saying this to you because I love you, and I know a lot of you love me. It is not easy to be in a place where you have the capacity to do these things, and ego does not get in the way. And the door for arrogance opens up. And then when you're running on empty, you're not sleeping well, eating well, there's no reflection or self-care. Shaitan has been doing this since day one. And these supremacist systems that are rooted in shaitani tendencies, this is what they want to control. Not just physical shackling, but psychological shackling. Do you see? And when you can exist within a system that understands that just because it surrounds you, it doesn't mean that you are embedded in it. You still yield to the idea of La ilaha illallah. It allows for the navigation to still be something that gives to you that meaning and contentment as your days go forward. So the Prophet is about to go on 23 years of a revelatory experience that he has to carry on his shoulders the responsibility of being a last messenger for every human being that's going to come after that revelation comes down. There's nothing without meaning in Allah's plan. A key variable to his capacity to fulfill that mission and not at the end of it feel destroyed, dejected, being in a place where he has bitterness, resentment. Think about people that work in social services, work in education, people who are not compensated adequately for the good things that they do, people who are treated poorly and nobody even recognizes them. At the end of it, they get burnt out, they get exhausted, they feel heavy inside, they feel bitter. When does anybody say that Muhammad mistreated me? He told me I'm too tired to talk to you right now. Do you get what I'm saying? So you have to see how this is not the absolute, but it's a key component to it. And where and how you build it in. You reflect with somebody that is your brother, your sister. You reflect with a counselor. You reflect with an elder, with a younger person. You are in a place where you take deliberate time. And it's not, man, I live in New York City and there's nothing natural here. One, there's a certain inherent beauty to New York that if you allow for yourself to be open to it, you'll feel it and experience it. But two, you just go upstate and you go to Queens. There's a lot of trees in Queens. Do you know what I mean? Right? There's all kinds of things. Go watch the sunrise over the Brooklyn Bridge. We take new students every year when they're first years to walk on the Brooklyn Bridge at Fajr. They pray Fajr on the Brooklyn Bridge. And it's an amazing experience for them because then they just watch the sunrise over the water. And what is it? It's not a hard recipe. There's a sun and there's water. And the two of them together are attaching you to things that are elemental, that have you understand that there are things that are much bigger than just what is concrete and kind of artificially made. Do you know? And then you get connected to things and they serve as reminders. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? The base of all of it is that it has to be important enough to you. Your heart has to be important enough to you. This is all very different from loneliness, right? And may Allah protect us from ever feeling alone or making others feel lonely. Loneliness statistically does to your body the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's not a good thing. Do you know? That's crazy. And what we want to do is create opportunities that when people walk into these doors, they come into our spaces, they share moments of interaction with us, that they feel as if that they can actually have a relationship with God. And we're not pushing people away based off of simplistic, reductive understandings of culturally hegemonic attitudes towards religion or religion in a vacuum in and of itself. The world is a really lonely place right now. It's very isolating. Everybody's got crap going on in their life. And then it's hard to figure out moments and places of stillness when there's no one to carry the heaviness that you carry. And so all of these things become connected. And this is why Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha is one of the most important figures and characters in the prophetic biography. Because as soon as the Prophet has doubt, she helps to remind him of who he is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's not rooted just in, you got to find a good spouse, a good husband, a good wife. You just got to have good friends around you. You got to have good people around you. You got to know that when you're opening up to someone, that they have a genuine care and concern for you, that they love you for who you are. The love that Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha has for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and vice versa, it's remarkable. And then they're able to be in this place where he can actually then recenter and then think out, what did I just go through? And I want you to think about this. As he's coming down the mountain, he thinks he lost his mind. He thinks he's been possessed by demons and jinns. Reflection is not about, let me just become subservient to what pops up in the moment immediately. Because if the Prophet kept telling himself again and again and again what he experienced in heightened, exhilarated emotion, I'm crazy, this is demonic, then the entire trajectory of prophethood would have been different, right? But the thoughts that he had, which were reasonable thoughts to have in a heightened emotion state, just because you think them doesn't mean that they're real. And then when he has an outlet to express the angst that he is there, that is going to hold some of what he has, which can be just as looking at the sun, or a friend to talk to, or a journal to write in. I don't have to name it as I'm going through it, but after I've gotten back to a place of stability, then I think back to say, what is this thing? Do you get what I mean? And then it allows for him to move forward in the ways that he's moving forward. We're not going to meet until January 17th is the next time we'll meet. The building is closed next week other than for Jummah prayers. And then January 3rd to the 12th, I'm going to be going on the IC's Umrah trip. Make dua for us, inshallah. Allah accepts from us. And anything that you all need, please let us know. We'll definitely be making dua for each of you. And I mean it. I love each of you so much. And I pray for you. I'm on this stupid Wi-Fi-less flight. I'm sitting in these other places, right? Like, you can't not think about the people you care about. Do you know? And so, understand, whether you ask or not, I'm going to be making dua for you. And that's just a given. But if you need something specific, let me know. I can't bring back a ton of stuff. And that's just because I'm limited in what we can bring back. But you let us know what we can do. We'll resume this probably on Wednesdays after we're back from that trip. And then going into January 22nd, when the spring semester starts again, we're going to have some different kind of programs, but this will still happen. But there'll be other things that we're doing during the week as well. Tomorrow, Sheikh Fayaz is going to be having a program here at 6 o'clock that I think is on the life of Jesus, peace be upon him. And for those who are going on the Umrah trip with us, we're going to do an in-person meeting as well as it'll be Zoomed in one of the classrooms. They're just about kind of spiritual preparations for Umrah. Anybody's welcome to join, whether you're going for Umrah or not, but that'll be in one of the classrooms at the end of the hall. I'm sorry I didn't email it out sooner. I didn't have access to internet for a few days. Not that that's come up in this conversation at all. And then on Friday, we'll have Jummah and lunch after Jummah prayers, but the building will close a little earlier because it's going into the winter break. I think it's going to close either at 4 o'clock or 7 o'clock. I'm pretty sure it's 7 o'clock. There's going to be 2 people who are coming to take their Shahada this Friday, but they're coming before Jummah starts instead of after. I have to run and catch a plane right after Jummah, and so they are going to come. So if any of you are going to be here on Friday, if you can come earlier, before the khutbah starts, we'll have these 2 people walk through their Shahada. And then on the 29th, if anybody is here, Khalid, who stepped out, who's on our staff, he'll be the only one from our staff here for Jummah that Friday, the 29th. So if any of you are able to come and help just with the setup and the cleanup on that Friday, the 29th, it would be extra helpful so that he has a few hands that are just helping him get through the day. And if you can help and just let him know before you leave, that would be great. We're going to keep the building open that Friday just from 12 o'clock till probably 3 or 4 o'clock. And then it's closed afterwards and beforehand. So you don't have to get here and be here for that whole window. But if any part of it you can help with, lunch, like setup for Jummah, etc., if you could just let them know, that would be great. We're still running this campaign for Gaza to provide aid to people on the ground. I might talk about it more on Friday at Jummah, but I'm assuming some of you won't be there. But I was able to go, alhamdulillah, to Cairo and get as close as possibly as somebody could get. And to also verify that there's a lot of misinformation in terms of what is happening with these goods crossing the border. The trucks are crossing the border, alhamdulillah, and it is getting to people. Even when we were there were people on the other side of the border that were sending us things in real time. as they were receiving these goods. So please do spread those links and share with others. There's essentially like two things that are happening. One, we're working with Penny Appeal, who's working with the Red Crescent, Red Cross, and the Palestinian Red Crescent essentially notifies them as to what it is that's the most immediate, urgent need. So why you see these images of all these long lines of trucks is people are packing these trucks with everything. Because think about this. These are like 1 million people. They're situated in a piece of land that's made for 200,000 people in Rafah, right? So there's 5 people for what is made for every 1 person. Do you know what I mean? So where you sit right now, think that your day is 5 people sitting on top of you. That's what they're going through right now, right? So the number of trucks crossing is 100 on any given day. And there's another entry point that they're going to open soon, inshallah. Make dua that they open this. That should increase the trucks to about 200 to 250. But these trucks wait in line because the Palestinian Red Crescent then says, this is what's the most urgent thing that we need on the ground right now. And so they'll move those up to get across sooner than later. Does that make sense? What else is happening is that there's a coalition of these charity organizations. It's really remarkable, right? I'm always impressed, subhanAllah, with just how generous people are. And you got to understand, even when the world is really dark and heavy, there are a lot of people like yourselves who they are really trying to do as best as they can. And there's all these people who run these agencies that are from different backgrounds, that I've been in different conflict zones and crisis situations in different parts of the world. And here too, they have a coalition of charities that are working together, that are in deep communication with each other to really think out how they can work as best as they possibly can. Why do I share this, right? It's not helpful to cast doubt that then runs like wildfire. Do you know? Even in our tradition, we have a legal maxim that says certainty is not lifted by doubt. So I literally went there and packed these boxes and put them in the trucks, and I've seen firsthand what is going on, and I'm telling you that it's going to go. And I know people's got different reasons as to why anxieties might show up. Do you know? But one person can just say, I don't really think that it's going. And then it interjects itself now as a thought into someone else's head that says, well, should I be doing this right now then? And then it just starts to push forward. We want people, especially as the weather is getting colder, to have access to these blankets, these tents. The number of women that have reached out who they just don't have basic feminine hygiene products, right? I was literally holding these boxes, and these guys, are there around the clock, but we're just putting all kinds of feminine hygiene products, pads, sanitary pads, etc., because they don't have any. Toilet papers, toothbrushes, toothpaste, soaps. You could say, is this necessary? Imagine what it would be like if you lived with no shelter, in the rain, and nothing to wash your clothes that you've likely worn for 74 days straight. What kind of rashes do you think are getting on people's bodies? What kind of discomfort are they experiencing? Do you know what I mean? And what you're offering to people is a sense of two things. One, that we see dignity in all of humanity. And we want to be able to give people a sense that here are things that contribute to the sense of dignity we have for you. And two, that you're not forgotten. That regardless of what anybody else does, we remember who our teacher is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that we're going to just still try to help as many people as we can. these goods are going to likely go to 10 to 15,000 families. That's 5 people per family on average. So 50 to 75,000 people. And then you think about that exponentially, how that can render a sense of comfort to people that are in like what is the most unfathomable sense of just hell on earth that you can really understand it to be. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? So if you can continue to share that link, pass it around, spread it to people, launchgood.com, aid to Gaza now, goes and makes a big difference. We already have raised $1 million, alhamdulillah, and a little bit more than that, and probably will hit on that campaign, 1.2, 1.5, inshallah. But that's not the metric of success. Like one of these food boxes that'll feed a family of 5 for a week costs $50. One of these hygiene boxes that'll also support a family of 5 costs $50, right? So you think about it and you do the math, like we're able to provide these things at this level just as long as there's funds that are there to continue to give people who have nothing just basic needs and necessities being met. Does that make sense? And so wherever you can help with that, inshallah, Allah will accept from us. And I'll say it to you all, and maybe I'll say it on Friday again. Another thing that people say, like, why do you do this? Is so that I can show the community that I love. It doesn't take a lot to be with people in their struggles, man. It's very different when you actually go and sit with someone face to face versus I'm just going to send you this thing on a text, or I'll let somebody else speak on my behalf. Do you know? And it doesn't mean all of us have to do it the same way. We all fit in different ways. I feel comfortable leaving for that amount of time and doing some of like the things that I do because I know there's a lot of you who are here that will care for this place. And I don't have any anxiety when I'm gone. That is something not happening? Is this getting messed up? Is that getting messed up? Because I know there's some of you here who love this place as much as I love this place. And I'm grateful that that's the case because there's not a lot of Muslim communities that function this way. Do you know? But you have to understand that sometimes it's really that inner part that makes us yield to doubt. It doesn't take so much to be with people in their time of need. It doesn't take that much. And what you give up, you can shift the paradigm through everything we talked about today and think about what it means in terms of actual gain, So may Allah make things easy for our brothers and sisters in Palestine and make us a community that's a continued source of benefit for His creation. But I appreciate you all for doing what you've done. And if you can continue to just spread the word, that would be helpful, inshallah. And if we limit kind of the negative, which is different from venting frustration, do you know? And understand that it is getting through, so we want to just help as much as we can in that regard, inshallah. Okay, so let's take a pause here. Khalid is back, so if any of you are able to help on the 29th for Jummah, just let him know before you go. I was telling people that Friday we could use some extra help and volunteers. If we don't get a lot of volunteers on the 29th, we won't have lunch that Friday, right? But we want to have lunch on Friday because it's fun to have lunch. And there's a lot of people that come during holiday times that have heard of this community from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. And we want them to experience that kind of vibe that then has them go back to their communities and say, hey, like Muslims smile at each other and they know each other's names, and these people are actually happy to like sit with one another, and they come from different races and different cultures and different ages. Do you know? So there's a lot of residual benefit that comes from it. So if you could let them know, if you could help on the 29th, inshallah, we'd appreciate it. Okay, so we'll see everybody, hopefully at Jummah. Otherwise, we'll see everyone in a few weeks, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.